Shalom. Welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmar, together with my co-host Mark Ronich of Statewide News Service, jbiztechvalley.com, and now columnist for the Jewish Press.
And I'm enjoying doing all of that, and we have a new set.
All right.
So you should give us a shechianu for
A
new
blessing
for a new set
Right.
or new something.
Should
new.
only be for good things. that's
Okay. So with us today, speaking of a rabbi, we have Rabbi Avraham Laber, who has many titles also. He's the co-founder of the Southern Rensselaer Chabad, and the runs a website, jewishdata.com. And then you also have a fancy for bees. And so we're going to talk about the Jewish genealogy, and then second half of the program we'll talk about bees. So welcome to the Jewish View. I know it's not the first time, but it's the first time on the new set, so welcome to the Jewish View.
Thank you, Mark, and I'm really honored to be in on the new studio.
So I wanted to ask you about Jewish genealogy. What are some of the questions that you get that are more common than others about Jewish genealogy?
Well, a lot of people ask, where do I find any information? I never met my grandparents. I don't know where they come from. What do they do for a living? People are searching for their own roots.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a bigger idea would be, I think I'm fairly typical of millions of Jewish people. Maybe I didn't know my grandparents, but they came over to both from Europe. So I don't know, where do I go even in Europe, or even, the cemetery in Europe, to know where they get the records from. So people maybe in our age know their grandparents, but a step beyond that, where do you go in Europe?
Oh, that's a great question, Rabbi. Well, you have to work your way backward. Look at the background. If you know from the documents, maybe you could find where they came from, the last place they lived in.
From where? How would you? Ellis Island would tell us anything?
So,
Documents from there when they came off the boat?
sometimes you could find it in those documents. One of the document sets that we do have at Jewish Data are we have copies of Declaration of Intention documents. And those were made when people would declare that, yes, I would like to become a citizen of this country. So in that document, people have to really write down their whole life story. They write where they were born. They even write their height and weight.
They had to know, because if they're not a criminal, what was the intent of the United States? They have them write a whole bio.
Well, just to know
who
exactly
they
who
are.
they are, where they're coming from.
I look back on my family's history, and I wanted to find out who my great-grandparents were and all that. I found ship manifests to be really helpful. And I also found that the Mormons have a lot of the records from Eastern Europe that were under the tabernacle in Salt Lake City. So I used to have to go there to see the records. Now they're all online, and that's one place. But Jewish Data, when I went to your site, jewishdata.com, it was so informative. It gave me so many new ideas that now I'm going back and I'm going to revisit plug in the holes because I found out my great-grandfather had two brothers, and we don't know that side of the tree, although there's a lot of other Groniches that we don't know how they were related. And I think it's because of those other two brothers and those branches from the trees that we can find out the connection.
What is really on the Jewish Data? Ship manifests or tombstones? I haven't, maybe I should be on it also, but I haven't. And so tell our viewers also, what does it contain?
Really, the name of the website is Jewish Data. So it's a gateway for all types of data. So we try to get all types of records up there, but the main categories that one will find one is Jewish tombstones, and that is close-up images of each tombstone. So whatever's on the tombstone.
From Europe also?
Mainly from the U.S.,
Yeah.
But we do have quite a collection from Israel, from Germany, some going back hundreds of years ago.
That's an important question also, because we all know that in World War II, the Nazis took over really the whole Europe, from France all the way into Russia. Did they leave intact records and tombstones? They destroyed Jews, so who knows
Right.
what they could have destroyed everything.
It seems like for the most part, in Germany, the Germans, they pretty much limited their main efforts to live Jews. And surprisingly, if you go today and you'll tour through different cities in Germany, you will find many more Jewish tombstones in Germany than you will find in Poland,
Lithuania.
or Ukraine, Lithuania, all those. There's just a lot more that's left intact in Germany.
Nice.
And in Poland and in Ukraine, there's actually very little.
Well, there's a gentleman locally here, Dr. Michael Lozman. I don't know if you know him, but
Sure.
he is, fixing up and giving a new life, so to speak, to cemeteries in Eastern Europe and Lithuania and a couple of other countries. But he's very into this, and he takes students overseas and as an educational process, and they clean up cemeteries that have fallen tombstones. Apparently, it seems like when a tombstone falls and it falls on the face, that preserves the writing a lot more than if it was weathered and it was facing up.
Exactly. But you see what he's dealing with. I know the Dr. Lozman, they're coming to fields that you don't see anything, but they just know that from the board that this is the border, this was a Jewish cemetery, and then they dig and they find different things until they actually kind of bring it alive.
Right.
But what
And
we
they put
do,
a fence around it also.
Right.
Yeah.
we work mainly with those Jewish cemeteries that are visible, or you
Right.
see when you walk by. So we're trying to preserve that which a person could see, and we save that with an image.
But his efforts should be a big boom to you because you can't see it, and when he brings it back to life, now you can, and those pictures maybe should be connected to your website in some way. I'm just thinking.
Yeah, we do have plans for that. We did speak with him. It just didn't happen all the way, but we definitely are interested in his work, and
Yeah,
it's
it's phenomenal.
very
what he
valuable.
does.
Sure.
Yeah. So, what about the different symbols? I know that you have something on your website that refers to symbols.
Oh, sure. Well, Mark, one I'm sure you know as a Kohen,
Mm-hmm.
you have the famous hand symbol, which is a symbol of the way it's a mitzvah, it's a commandment for the Kohanim, for the Kohens, to bless the people. And when this was done, they would hold their hands in a special way. And that is one of the famous symbols that you'll find on Jewish tombstones. And that means that this male is a Kohen.
The deceased.
Yeah.
In that, yeah, okay.
Person.
So let me ask you. It's interesting. I noticed that different countries honor the deceased in different ways. So, for example, I noticed a lot of Russians. They have elaborate tombstones, and they make them polished black, and they put pictures of the deceased, and it's just amazing. Designs I noticed mainly for the Russians. Is that something you found, or is that just my imagination?
Well, I think you're right about some of the Russian Jews. I think they kind of adopted that custom, not from their Jewish tradition, but mainly just from what people do where they come from. It's not really a known Jewish practice.
Because their tombstones are not just square. I mean, they're curvy. They have a lot of almost like they're designing something. It's not just a flat, either a footstone or a headstone.
I don't know if that makes a difference to different shapes.
I didn't know.
But one thing is the picture really isn't, according to Torah Judaism,
is not.
to show. Yeah,
It's-
that
you
means you can make it curvy or whatever.
Right, but you shouldn't put a picture on there.
It's usually not done Although we have a lot of records from Chicago, and some of those, even old ones, some of them do have a
Picture.
picture.
Does that say
Picture.
something about the person, that their family was not necessarily Orthodox, or does it say maybe they're Reform, or does it
Doesn't
send
really
some sort
say
of-
that much.
Doesn't say, okay. What about determining a year of death? You have that on your website. It says close examination of some inscriptions helps to decipher puzzling elements.
Well, sometimes, the tombstone could have the date in the Jewish year. For example, this year, like 5,776. You could, and sometimes some tombstones have the regular secular date. But sometimes, from that date, you could, let's say if it doesn't have any English, or maybe that part's rubbed off, well, then you have a second source.
Right.
When you have the Hebrew, the Jewish date.
I
So
see.
that gives some info.
Okay, and what about biblical quotations? It's regarded as meritorious if a person's memorial bears an appropriate biblical passage.
Well, it's just something, it's kind of like artistic and it's expressive. When the tombstone doesn't just have dry information with just the name and father's name, but sometimes there are certain passages from the Torah and from the prophets. For example, it may be a woman, and it might use passages that describe a woman who feeds the hungry.
A woman of worth who can find.
Yeah, well, that's a very common one, and
That's a common one.
some are more descriptive. There are some from Germany that we have going back 200 years ago, and they'll say things like, "She would never let a poor man past her house,"
Right.
or "She was always raising money for Israel,"
I see.
coming from Germany.
And would they put that in English or Hebrew, or both?
Or German.
Right.
Usually, those are only in Hebrew.
Okay. And, you have here that on the stone of a man who died at age 20 is a passage from Genesis, and the young lad is not with us. Thought that was touching.
Yeah, and some of them even have images of like a tree falling,
Oh.
to indicate that this person was very young and didn't have a chance to grow up.
And then you have a stone of a man who occupied the president's seat in the synagogue for some years. Now that's a political statement, isn't it? Is a passage from Samuel 1, thou shalt be missed because thy seat will be empty.
Yeah,
Or maybe not missed.
Mr. Chill. Listen, just
Yeah.
how many? Just a few more questions because we want to go into
Sure.
practicing with the beast. But how many? How much data? How many people, or I should say, graves? How many deceased are on your data? And are you still working on it? I mean, is there more? Like I say, ultimately, there's a limited number of graves to picture.
Right, but we have a long way to get there.
Really.
There are many around the world. But what we're interested is not just the tombstones. Like I said, we have documents, like those declarations of intentions. And another area that we do is books. There are a lot of old books that have a lot of detailed information. Biographies of people. Some of these books are in Hebrew only, and then we'll get them indexed into English.
So how does someone want to, they're interested now to find out their roots. And, well, I know I am, just saying that I know my grandparents, but I really don't know anything. I was named after my great-grandparents. I know his name, that's all, Nachman, and one's Yosef, and that's all I know about him. But, how would someone go about finding out a little more details?
Well, the website is really a tool. It's a useful tool. It doesn't have all the answers. It's not going to just tell you everything. But it's a useful tool. When someone logs on, they enter the name, the last name, do a search. And then they could also limit the search. Maybe, let's say, you might know that they lived in Boston. So you might want to limit to Massachusetts. And then you'll start, looking. What do I see? Maybe I got a new name I didn't know. Maybe an uncle you didn't know about. And then you just try to follow one to the other. We have also a lot of newspaper articles. They also have information.
Sometimes websites cooperate with each other. I know in the news business, you'll see Politico and the Times Union and the Daily News, and they'll all link to different stories that each of them might have run first, and then another paper did a follow-up. How much do you do in terms of interacting with maybe Ancestry.com or some other of these other websites? Because you're specific for the Jewish data,
right,
which is appropriate for your website name. But what about other websites that maybe could help either drive traffic to your site, or or you could link off of and help each other?
Sure. Well, there is one big website, one of the larger databases. It's called World Vital Records. And this website, World Vital Records, when someone conducts a search, it will show the results from Jewish data as well, among other things. So that is one of the major ones that will send things towards us.
Okay. So when did you start this website?
2003.
Great. Well, keep up the good work with that. I think that's really great. I think we're going to switch over and talk about your other passion,
Sure.
which is bees. And why don't you tell us, how you got interested in bees? Do you have beehives around your house? Do you? I had an art teacher from high school who had bees in Ulster County, and he brought in pictures where he was without any cover, without any protection. He had bees swarming all over him. Because if you don't hurt them, I guess they don't hurt you. But maybe you could tell us more about the bees.
Sure. Well, it was about 12 years ago, and I noticed that my neighbor was tending some honeybees. So I asked him one day if it would be all right if I would purchase some honey. It was close to the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah. It's customary to use honey. So I thought he would agree and just sell me some honey. And instead, he said to me, no, I think you should get your own. And he was nice about it, but he encouraged me to start my own hive. Well, I had no idea how to do it.
But it's like give a man a loaf of bread or show him how to bake.
Exactly. But we had a cleaning lady who came from Moldavia. And I mentioned it to her. She only spoke Russian. And I picked up some Russian during the time when I was a rabbinical student. We did a Chabad overnight camp in Russia for a few summers. So she mentioned to me that her husband used to run more than 100 hives. So he knows how to do it. So I invited him over. We had a talk, and he said he would get me started. And he helped me out. And
how many hives do you have?
2 hives.
2 hives. Yeah. And not the scratching type that you have on your skin.
What do you start with, a few just then to let them reproduce, or how often do they reproduce? I mean, you start with a few.
It's good to have at least 2 hives. This way you have one to compare against the other in case something's not looking right. It's good to have at least 2. And that's what I started with. And normally, once it gets started, if nothing goes wrong, they should be all right to continue. In other words, they should continue on for years. But there are no guarantees, and sometimes things go wrong. For example, last winter, when we had that real cold stretch, it knocked out my honeybees.
Really?
And
so do you have any now? Did you?
Well, I had to order some new ones.
Oh, you ordered them?
Let me ask you, what Mark was bringing out also, but, I'd hear bees, and I say, I'm staying away, I'm not going to get stung. I mean, did you ever get stung?
Well, there's really a misconception. Honeybees are very peaceful. These are not... The ones that most people are annoyed by, those are, for the most part, not honeybees. For example, a lot of people associate sitting in the sukkah,
Mm-hmm.
the holiday of Sukkot.
Yeah.
Sitting in the sukkah, people associate it, well, when it's warm, or
The
places
bees,
that it's
yeah.
warm, they get bees and they bother them. But those are really not honeybees. Those are usually wasps.
Yeah.
Not killer bees.
Wasps look for anything sweet.
Okay.
But honeybees, they're looking for nectar
Uh-huh.
and honey. Well, looking for nectar that they make into honey. So they don't come into our sukkah, which is really very close to them. So the honeybees are busy. They're working.
They're not bothersome really. So that's why
Yeah.
they go on people's arms and
They're
people
working.
Well,
aren't
I mean,
scared.
I have gotten stung,
Yeah.
but it's in the course of, going up to their hive and opening it up, and it's kind of threatening to them when you go up there and you start taking their house apart. So they could get a little aggressive sometimes,
What?
but usually they're pretty gentle, and they let the beekeeper do what we have to do.
There's
Peacefully.
a colony collapse syndrome. I'm sure you're aware of.
Yeah.
I'm not. What is it?
What it is that all of a sudden bees disappear and they don't know why.
This only
And-
last few years?
The 10, 15 years. And there was a big scare because bees pollinate. And if you don't have the bees, they might wipe out, let's say, California's vegetable crops. There's so much of agriculture that's dependent on bees. It's really a real life source, a continuation of life.
Right.
So I was wondering if you could tell us a little about your experience with colony collapse syndrome, if you had any.
Well, I did have more difficulties in the past few years, over, let's say 8 years ago. So there's something's going on. I can't tell you exactly what it is.
No one
but I
can.
think I think it may be some of the pesticides are becoming more harmful
Mhm.
to honeybees. So I think that is part of the threat. It's better to keep things
Pure.
pure, more natural. A lot of people use very heavy chemicals on their lawn,
Mm-hmm.
and if they would just mow it more often, they wouldn't need all these chemicals.
Mm.
It would stay
Interesting.
weed-free.
Okay. So you have a sample of a.
Yeah, right.
Is that a beehive that you have there, or
Well,
what is that called?
What I brought here, this is a frame.
Well, we could put that on the front. Yeah, there you
There you go.
This
Yeah,
is an
that's
empty
fine.
frame that I pulled from the hive.
go. Okay.
Now, what you see here,
Honeycombs.
this is honeycomb. All right. Now, the frame itself is plastic.
Oh, okay.
Okay. But you see the empty. This is how it comes,
Yeah.
and then they build out.
The bees.
The honeybees
Okay.
they construct this special design.
Wow.
Okay.
Because it follows, I don't know if people could see it on the TV, but the imprint, the plastic it has an imprint of hives. If you would make a different design, they would go according to the design. What if it would
No.
be triangles?
No,
They
they
wouldn't
would
go-
do the same thing.
Really?
But you see, this is very important because this becomes the home
Right.
where all activity takes place.
Right.
Now, when I say, in other words, this is not only for our honey. There are a lot of other functions that this comb is used for.
Breeding.
Breeding is one,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's storage.
Oh, of
Right.
what?
Storage of pollen
Mm-hmm.
and storage of nectar which is made into the honey.
Okay.
But then there are sections of it are for storage that they'll use the pollen to feed the queen, to feed the growing honeybees. Actually, I brought another image here. I don't know how well you could see this.
Oh, look at that.
This
Look
is
at
a
all these
close-up
bees.
of one of my hives.
Mm.
You see the different colors there?
Yeah. Maybe we can.
So the lighter
Yeah,
color is honey. That's
Uh-huh.
honey that's stored. And the kind of orange
Yeah.
color, that's larvae
They turn
of
it
ones
around.
that from eggs that the queen laid,
Oh.
and those are they will eventually hatch into honeybees.
Mm. Wow. So we shouldn't be afraid of bees. We should be afraid of wasps.
Yes,
Okay.
you have little to fear from honeybees, except in some of the hot places, some of the warm states like Florida. There's talk about killer
Yeah.
honeybees.
Yeah.
There's some kind of experiment that went wrong in Brazil some years ago, led to an overly aggressive gene, and some of these overly aggressive ones
They're-
sometimes attack people.
But they're in Florida.
So far, yeah.
Okay.
We hope they
Stay
we
in
hope they don't
Florida.
get this far north.
Okay, so
How much? So what's your production total? How much honey do you get out of two hives? Really, isn't you're not a major producer. But
I'm not producing
you
for
have,
business.
Just over there. a
but you
little
do
honey.
have
This is
a
the kind
sample of your honey.
sample of my honey.
It looks pretty pure.
I get about 50 pounds or so.
But that's
Between
a
50
lot.
and 100.
So that's a lot of.
yeah, because I know that you know do
Well, you gotta
share
sample it,
you do
huh?
share some
Yeah.
in September, October during the holidays.
Let me ask you. You know, it says that about you should have a kosher symbol on the bee honey. I mean, in the store, because you're your own supervisor. But I mean, why do you need it if it's coming from the bees?
Right, if it's so pure. Yeah.
That's a good question. I mean, honey is kosher. And the Talmud talks about it and says that even though the honey bees themselves are not kosher, but the honey is kosher because it's really just nectar from the flowers that they just add a little bit of their own enzymes, and then they do a little process that makes it into the honey. So it's not like something from their own bodies. So of course the honey itself is kosher. But when you talk about supervision, though, you know, some of the honey in the larger factories and stuff, what they're doing is they're pasteurizing the honey.
Oh, the
So-
bees are pastured?
No,
No,
in the factory.
factories.
So what are they
going through that
pasteurizing?
pasteurization process, you need
Pasteurization. Well,
has
they're
to
using
be-
machinery that's used for other things.
right.
Why would they pasteurize it? I mean, what do they get the germs out? What kind of germs?
It doesn't really need it.
Really?
However, the main reason they do it is because it makes it easier to work with. The hotter, the warmer the honey is,
Yeah.
then it flows better. It's more liquidy, more like water, closer to water. So for machinery, that's easier to work with.
So if you have older honey and that crystallizes,
Yes.
what do? Do you heat it up to make it better, or to rejuvenate it? Like when I get a hard bagel, I put in the toaster, it becomes better. I can then eat it. But what do you do with the crystallized honey?
Well, that's the other reason that they pasteurize, is that in order to give it a longer shelf life,
Yeah.
and then in order to prevent it, to extend the time that it has on the shelf before it would crystallize, once they heat it up like that, it's not going to crystallize for a long time.
Right.
But with the raw honey, like the kind I do, it will crystallize much sooner,
Like in a matter
after-
of weeks or months.
probably about a month or two
Yeah.
months.
Is there a season for it? I mean, like sometimes apples are in the fall, the bees make honey. I mean, it's a year-round process, or
Well-
is it like there's a good season for it, or spring, fall?
Well, I don't think winter is a very good season, right?
Well,
I don't know.
the answer is whenever you see flowers.
So that's
When
springtime
you go
is
out,
the-
if you
the
see
program.
flowers, well, that's a good time for new production. No flowers, there's no production.
Yeah, I noticed that there are, around my house, the flowers or the plants or whatever that grow faster are the ones that the bees are attracted to and pollinating around.
Yeah. Well, you see the
And I don't
pollination.
disturb them, I leave
Right,
them,
sure. The pollination stimulates the growth,
yeah.
and a lot of them won't even make fruit if they're not pollinated. So in April time,
Yeah.
which is usually in the Jewish calendar, the month of Nisan, which is when we look forward to seeing the new flowers in the trees. Well, that's when they get to work,
Uh-huh.
and they'll cover. We have a few apple trees. They'll come out there, and they kind of cover the tree with thousands of them. They go to every flower, and they're pollinating those flowers.
So when you go, when you said you had to order more bees, how long does it take? On 60 Minutes, they did the story about the colony collapsing, and they showed all these trucks that they have. Long tractor trailer trucks of bees, and How long does it take for you to get them shipped to you, and does the UPS guy really have to worry?
Well, the UPS, they wouldn't worry, but they don't usually come by UPS.
Okay.
What you're talking about is some people, they'll move thousands of hives.
Right.
They'll move them like from here, this area where it gets really cold in the winter, usually, not this year, but they'll move them to the warmer places like Georgia or Florida.
Right.
And then they'll bring them back in April time. So if one of those trucks, if something rolls over, well then it'll spill
lot
onto
of
the
bees.
highway. But
Okay,
normally
so
it's fine.
So how long does it take from when you order bees to come to you?
Well, just as long as a truck would
They'll
drive.
be a few days.
Right,
So
but
a few days,
It's a few
yeah.
days, so we're not talking a long time. Okay.
Yeah. Well, people want to minimize that. They don't want to go for too long.
Okay.
But I wanted to mention, I don't know how much time we have,
a
but
few seconds.
one thing is that, Mark and Rabbi, you know how this year is a very special year of Hakhel.
Uh-huh.
That every 8th year in the Jewish calendar, all Jewish, it's a mitzvah.
Right.
Everyone would gather together in the temple and they would listen to the Torah being read by the king. So it emphasizes unity and people working together. And I think we see a lot of this in the beehive.
Yeah.
Because they also have a
Busy
king.
as a bee.
They have a king, which is really a queen.
Right.
And in this picture here, this is the queen.
Okay.
All right? And there's only one queen in the hive.
Right. Exactly.
All right? But the queen creates the spirit of the hive.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like the people accepting a king.
Okay.
All right? So it's like the Jewish people accepting the king, which really reflects the fear of God.
Uh-huh.
And you see it in the beehive, the way they're all working together.
Right.
I mean, one honeybee could really accomplish very little. And their whole lifetime, which could be about 6 months, they could only produce a real small amount of honey, maybe a quarter of a teaspoon.
Uh-huh.
But because they're all working together, they have that unity, they're working together, they appreciate each other, well, they accomplish great things.
That's a great
And that's
way to
one of the
end-
lessons we
Yeah.
could learn from them.
That's a great way to end the show.
All right, so actually, thank you, Rabbi Laber, for twofold over here, telling about Jewish genealogy, and I invite our listeners and viewers to check it out, jewishdata.com, and maybe provide a little honey and getting a whole big production there.
That's
But
right.
it should be a sweet year
That's right.
because the honey is sweet. And thank you very much for being on the Jewish Field.
Thank you. Continued success.
Thank you, and it's my pleasure.
We'll stay there.
All right, good job.